Oh, great. Okay, then maybe that'll save us the time of having you send it to me. So, yeah,
Yeah,
anyway,
so check down below. Do you see your, does it say pause, stop recording?
yes.
Okay, so you're recording on your computer now. You should be.
Oh, great, great. Yeah, so as I was saying, the what is question is kind of like what is the soul? Um, you know, I always, when I was a kid, I was taught, it's just something inside of you that's invisible and it floats away when you pass away. And I came across Rudolf Steiner's threefold diagram, and this woman, Lynn Jericho, who lectured at the anthroposophy meetings, talked about, that exactly that idea that the soul is invisible, that there are super sensible sides of us and sensible sides of us. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. Yeah. How do you feel about that, Mike? What is your experience?
Well, I mean, when I came across this diagram that this woman wrote at the meeting, I thought it was really interesting. She kind of referred to the Steiner's threefold soul: thinking, feeling, willing, all of which are invisible things. So that kind of adds to that invisible quality of the soul. And she kind of spoke of thinking, feeling, and willing as like organs of perception that perceive truth, harmony, and goodness, respectively. So
Mhm.
I just thought that was really interesting because I never thought of those things as being part of the soul. Do you categorize those things as part of the soul? And what's your definition of the soul?
Yeah, well, that's where we would have to start, would be with the definition of the soul. And that's why I'm trying to probe you with some questions of experience, because that's really, we have to ground even the definition of the soul in our experience. So it begins with, who are you, right? And where do you come from? That's kind of those are the basic questions. And when I say where do you come from, it's not so much, it's not about your biography and it's not about your ancestry or anything like that. It's where do you come from? If you've ever wondered uh, where your words come from, when we speak, our words just form automatically. It's very fast, and it's though they come from a source that it's pre-conscious for sure. So we would have to ask, if our words come from a source that is pre-conscious, what is that source? You see, now this kind of question gives us an immediate inroad into what we're really asking. You see, because if we ask what is the soul, and we think of it in terms of just a thing, right? Some kind of an object or a noun, then we miss we miss a whole dimension of it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because we have to be able to connect with it in our immediate experience. So so yes, there is a super sensible, you could call it that. There's also a sub-sensible, right? We have a subconscious mind and we have a superconscious mind. So you see what I mean?
Yeah,
Uh,
and that kind of ties into one of the things that this woman I studied mentioned. She said that in that soul diagram I sent you, that there are, like, she referred to them as gifts of the spirit. And those were imagination for thinking, inspiration for feeling, and intuition for willing. And like
right.
when I read like George Coolin or Garrett Coolin, I don't know how to pronounce it, he mentioned that these, like, finding out where these things come from is integral to understanding of the spirit, like where. And a lot of people say, like, when they make famous works of art, like, oh, where did you come up with, how did you imagine that? And they feel like it's just like given to them. Is that kind of what you're talking about with this, where do these things come from?
Well, I would different. I wouldn't call them gifts. No more than I would call your arm a gift, or your liver, or your eyeballs, right? Your faculty of vision. These are not gifts. These are more like these are givens. And I know it's give and gift, given, but we have to we have to realize that we're living in a body. If we regard ourselves as our physical body, there is so much about this body we have no idea how it works, right? We have more knowledge today, perhaps from one perspective, the scientific perspective. We have more knowledge today about the physical body than we've ever had, and it's still a mystery. We don't know how it works. So if we're going to consider the soul, we have to consider that there is an intelligence that runs this body. This body is running according to an intelligence. In fact, each organ in our body has its own kind of intelligence, its own consciousness, you might say. Now, when I say consciousness, I don't mean, whether it's looking up sales in Walmart. Not that kind of consciousness. I mean, it's aware of what of its environment and what it needs to do, in the same way that a sunflower knows through heliotropism to turn its blossom toward the sun and follow it, track it throughout the day, right? That's consciousness. That's intelligence working. Intelligence is the how would you say? It's just the way that works, and the laws and the processes by which that heliotropism works. The consciousness is the organism's interface with that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so when it comes to us, we know that we need to move. We know we need to eat. There are all kinds of bodily functions that we have to do all throughout the day. We don't know. We can't make them happen. We can't make our heartbeat start or stop just through will. Some things are beyond our will altogether, but they are operating nonetheless, and they are operating according to an intelligence, and we interface with that intelligence. We can be conscious of our breathing. We can be conscious of all these things. So when we're dealing with the soul, we have to think of it in terms. A good analogy is that the soul is to us as the operating system in our computer is to the computer.
Mm-hmm.
It is the background. It's the background architecture of how it processes information, both input and output. You see, and then we have our user interface with our soul then is through our senses, and it's through our thinking. You see,
Mm-hmm.
but things like willing and imagination, those are features of the operating system. They are not things that are just given to us. You see, they've been developed over a long period of time, but even unicellular organisms have a will. They move towards what they need, and they move away from what they want to get away from, right? So
Yeah.
that's aversion and attraction. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Now I wanted to ask you, there is, in kind of like a lot of esoteric circles, the differentiation between body, soul, and spirit. So how do you
yeah.
classify the idea of spirit, given what your definition of the soul is? How do those differ?
Okay, so the body is, we could almost say it is the outward manifestation of the soul, because it's the outward manifestation of the intelligence that seeks to operate and exist on this plane of manifestation. And we know there are many different planes of manifestation, the physical plane being one. Much of what's here on the physical plane is invisible to us. We do not see anything except within the visible spectrum of light. We know of other things, but only through instruments. We know that there's an electromagnetic environment, there's a radioactive environment, there's a solar environment, the solar wind, there is vibrational information coming to us from stars,
Mm-hmm.
It's like we think of a star as being way out there somewhere. No, if it's right here, it's vibration, it's information, whatever information that star emits is right here. You see, so we're nested in all of these environments that we're not even aware of, right? We have to think about those things first. So, but as we think about, just I know this is kind of a roundabout way to come at it, but it's really essential to get these concepts before we can even begin to talk about the soul. In the 1800s, they discovered electromagnetism and electricity, and they started learning how to work with it. And all the esoteric literature then was just filled with scientific terminology, right? Remember that?
Yeah, yeah.
Fields and rays and all of that. So, but it's a real thing. Electromagnetism is indisputably real, but it's invisible, right? We can't see it. We can see what it does, but we can't see it. And in fact, if you ask most electrical engineers now and scientists what electricity is exactly, they can't tell you. They don't know. There's a lot of different ideas about it. They're not even sure now if the electricity actually moves through the wire or around the wire. That's how
Oh,
how
interesting.
oh yeah, there's been a lot of recent work done on that recently.
Oh, wow.
So it's quite mysterious, you see. So we have to think of the soul. If the soul is the operating system of the body, just the way your operating system works with your computer, then we'd have to consider that there's memory involved. You have to have memory in an operating system, otherwise, it's not, you can't run programs, right? That requires memory. And you also require connection to the internet, and that's like to the cloud computing.
Hmm.
So in other words, this computer that we have is not just hardware, and it's not just software. It is connection. So there's a reason why, and you've probably studied Rupert Sheldrake and his morphogenetic fields.
No.
Oh, okay. He'd be a good one to look up. What he says is that there is a field of intelligence that governs the morphology of a species of animal or plant. So that even though we're separated by 1,000, 1,500 miles, your stomach operates exactly the same way as mine does. Within a very close range.
Hmm.
Given all things being equal, our bodies are 99.9999% identical, right? With just little variations to genetics and lineage and all of that. So the same
Sorry to
intelligence.
interrupt you. Is that a sound coming through loud to you? I just don't want to muffle what you're saying.
Oh no, not at all. I can't hear
Okay,
it.
because there's air conditioning going right here. So
No, I can't hear it at all.
sorry. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so we have to think in terms of not just an intelligence that's running our body, but a universal intelligence that's non-local, that's everywhere, right? And this is where it doesn't make sense in 3D, physical reality, because things are separate, or they appear to be separate. But
So there's
in the
definitely a lot of aspects of our world that are super sensible, kind of is what.
oh, so well, what does the word mean? It means above our ability to perceive, right? And we can name at least a dozen things. I just named a few, right? That are super sensible. There are also things that are subsensible. Like
Hmm.
we can't hear the movements within the mantle of the earth, or even the crust of the earth, unless it's really close to the surface. Those sound waves are so long we can't perceive them. You see, in the same way with like infrared light, those wavelengths are so long they don't register on our in our in our cerebrum,
Yeah.
right? So
And
there's
you had
the
mentioned before that sometimes the brain is kind of a limiting organ that only allows us to see a certain range, because I guess if we were to see the whole thing, it would overwhelm us, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. We would have to sacrifice our self-consciousness in order to do that. In other words, we'd have to become totally automatic in order to deal in that kind of environment. So you might say that the reason we don't know those things is so that we can experience autonomy and agency or free will. If we did not filter out most of what's here available, then the only way we could function would be to go on automatic, and then at the cost of our consciousness and self-consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? This is kind
Yeah,
of the
I feel
answer.
like what you
Yeah,
just said reminds me of willing. Like if we had experience to everything and we were open to all this, I feel like that would come to the detriment of like choice. Like if we have a limit, we have to make a choice, but if we have no limit, there. So I feel
there
like
is
with
no choice, right?
limitation there comes freedom and choice, and like for example, like choosing somebody to marry, it's a the choice kind of enhances the love, because I feel like love requires you to make a choice for something, but with no
Yes,
limitation I feel like there is no choice.
right, right. But it's a good example, love, because when you fall in love with somebody, it's usually way beyond your control, right? It's like squirrel, right? And this person captivates you. You cannot get them out of your mind. You feel ill. You don't know what's going on. Your whole body is going through all of these changes. So there's an intelligence, and that intelligence, it either fits or it doesn't fit, right? Square peg,
Mhm.
round hole kind of thing.
Yeah.
So not everybody is going to elicit that kind of response in you, of course, but the ones that do, man, you don't have a choice.
Mhm.
Right? You can't say, no, I don't think I love that person, especially at the outset. It's like
One question
you're
I wanted to ask you was, I feel like in today's day and age, things are very materialistic, visual. So I feel like outwardly people say to themselves, I need to monitor my actions, my appearance, all these things to be acceptable. But within the realm of their soul, they say, oh, I can do whatever I want because it's not going to make a difference. But my question is, do you feel like the inward life needs some kind of structure and organization in order to function, and does that inward life spill into your outward life kind of as a result?
Well, I think that's pretty obvious, don't you? I mean, if a person just gives way to their impulses, their life goes to hell in a handbasket rather quickly.
Mm-hmm. Like for
If
example, like little things like, oh, if I say in my head I don't like that person, they're never going to know, but that thought may influence your actions towards them, and they may actually end up knowing what you're thinking. So thusly the monitoring of your inward, like I feel like thoughts are what you feed your brain, you know what I mean? And if you feed it
mm,
unhealthy things, unhealthy things happen.
right, right. Well, another adult might not be able to tell whether you like them or not, but little kids generally do, and dogs for sure know whether you do or not, right? So, would you agree? Have you
I
have you
never had a
experienced that?
dog, so I have found I used to think I could let my mind do anything, but I feel like as I grow older, I feel like there's a lot of transparency, between more transparency than what you think of what you're thinking versus what you're doing. Kind of like
Right.
implicit biases. That was a term we came across in my studies at school. How implicit biases are kind of easy to see, it could based on your actions. I don't.
Yeah, yeah. Well, like in a corporation, you could say that the executive alone in his office has no effect on the whole company. But in reality, his character is a result of the thoughts we run through our heads, right? Habits become character, like Ovid said. So we have to be careful that the habits we form are very important because they're going to cascade through every other aspect of our life. If we have a habit of getting angry, for instance, then we're going to be getting angry a lot. And that'll become like our default mode where if something irritates us, we get angry, right? And that's not a very good way to live one's life because it causes you to miss a lot of opportunities for constructive activity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and the same with biases, if you allow yourself to have biases and you never check yourself or question your biases or your beliefs, it's kind of the same thing, then you're not going to have much going on in the way of growth, personal growth. Your understanding will be stuck at a certain level, or at least channeled down a very limited range of options.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are self-aware, and that's what we're talking about here, self-awareness, and you know that there's a linkage between what the inner and the outer, which I think that's pretty much.
And that's a quote from the Kabbalion, right? They make the inner like the outer, and the above.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, all esoteric systems that I know of, have some form of that, because your thoughts affect your life. Your every thought is a prayer, because thoughts are mental patterns, right? Thoughts are like programs. So if you've got a faulty program, you're going to have a faulty life.
Mm-hmm.
If like, one of the most pernicious programs that people are running today through their thinking is that they're a victim, that everything that happens to them is beyond their control and they have no agency. And so that affects their entire life. They have, it's self-sabotaging in the extreme.
Yeah.
So if an opportunity comes their way, they'll just say, well, that's, why pursue that? Somebody's just going to take it away from me. You see, they have no
Yeah.
dream, they have no vision. And
Uh-huh.
like the Bible said, without a vision, the people perish. And that's true on an individual level. And we can choose our vision. You see?
Now, one question I have is, can we choose to use the operating system, use the soul to change the operating system and to change the soul? I think
Yeah.
one of the remarkable things about what that I learned about Steiner's diagram is that these aspects of the soul, like thinking, feeling, and willing, they can like turn in on themselves and perceive themselves. So it's kind of like a remarkable state in the universe where consciousness is facing itself. You know what I mean? And
Yep.
I always felt that one of the ways to change was to turn these things in on themselves, observe your thoughts, and try and track back. I thought this thought. What came prior to that? What came prior to that? What came prior to that? So, do you think that the soul has an ability to turn in on itself and change? And if not, like, how does the soul become an agent of its own change?
You want to think of the soul again like an operating system, which is automatic. It has been built to do a certain job, and it has memory, and it has programming, it has connection. So there's that part of us that has those same attributes. We came into these bodies. These bodies were already here when we got here. They were developing to the point where then a being with a greater consciousness could use that vehicle and then start changing it from within. So think of the spirit as that. It's like, you can get at it through colloquialisms, like, school spirit or the spirit of a company. What is that? What characterizes that? It's like
A
the
zeitgeist or something.
right. It's the vision. It's what makes you come alive. That's the spirit of you is your aliveness and your direction. You see, and coming out of a field of memory, having seen good and bad, you've chosen a certain good and you're going for that. And that is your total motivation. That's your spirit. You see, you want to find out. You can have a spirit of wanting to know the truth. You see, so a person who has that kind of spirit, when a mystery comes before them, they're drawn to that mystery.
Mhm.
Another person might have a spirit of stability, wanting to keep things on an even keel. Something new comes along like that. If it doesn't have any immediate utility, they discard it. They say that is not relevant. And if I take attention off of keeping things stable, then doing so will make everything unstable. You
Mhm.
see? So that's a different kind of spirit. And then you have, the spirit of healing. Some people are drawn to heal because that's their spirit. They want to heal. Other people have a spirit of knowledge, of knowing. So there be like mathematicians or philosophers. There are many different manifestations of the character of the spirit. But you take all of those and you follow them back to their source, and then you have a one spirit, a whole spirit, one that comes like a beam of light through a prism, and then gets refracted into all of these different kinds of spirit.
Now
You
you
see?
mentioned that spirit as one. Is that kind of like what some people talk about of the overcoming of dualistic thinking and
Oh
duality,
yeah,
and like kind of like being one with God in the Garden of Eden and paradise, and then
yeah.
the split. I think a lot of traditions talk about this split from oneness.
Right,
So
right.
is the spirit kind of like the home of oneness, do you think?
Yeah, yeah, but it's important to recognize that non-duality and duality are like a package deal. You can't have one without the other. So the spirit of it isn't to withdraw out of duality and go back into non-duality. That's not the spirit at all. The spirit that we're looking at is the spirit of exploration. It's like God coming into this part of God's own self, this plane of manifestation, this plane of vibration, seeking to know and seeking to give and seeking to interact with and to love. You see, that's the spirit. That's the Holy Spirit. So there's this spirit of creativity. It's positive. It's absolutely positive. So so that's the spirit we partake of, and you can't reduce it to a thing. You see, it's more like a quality.
Or maybe an activity or something, or
It expresses through activity. So like the
because I have
technical
heard the
definition.
definition of like becoming, and I think there was certain Native American traditions that they don't say I'm going to write with this pen, they say I'm penning. It's all verbs, like
Exactly,
an
exactly.
activity ongoing. Like what was it, Heraclitus, you can't step into the same river twice. I feel like you can't step into the same, self twice, because it's constantly under a change.
Right, right. And every tradition talks about that. It's being in the present moment and saying that there is nothing but the present moment, right? So, but there is memory. So as we go through this, as we live in the present moment, we are constantly setting patterns within that matrix of memory. And that's it, it has to be there because that's the basis of all evolution. That's the basis of learning. That's the basis of consciousness. You have to have a memory matrix to make sense of the world. If
Mhm.
there was no memory, you've heard of people who lose that short-term memory. Every time they turn around, they forget what they were just doing. And it's like they can't live their lives. Their lives are in total chaos because there's no continuity.
There's no memory.
There's no memory, right?
Yeah.
So memory, and we know too that memory is built into these bodies. We have like muscle memory, you know, and at different levels. The whole body is like operating on the basis of memory. We know what to do. The body knows what to do.
Mm-hmm.
You see, you don't need to teach yourself how to breathe,
Yeah,
or
that's
how to
true.
digest your food, or how to maintain homeostasis in your blood pressure, or your your sodium potassium balance in your body. We don't do that because we don't need to do that.
How do you I have a funny story about my friend was taking this course about changing his, habit patterns. And I asked him, does this, and he knows me as the kooky spiritual guy. So he's taking
Uh-huh.
this course about change. And I said, did your lesson mention anything about a higher self? And he goes, no, 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 Mike, it's not all that kooky spiritual stuff you're involved in. And then the next chapter, chapter 7, the higher self, I've always found that the higher self is like often referred to as an agent of change, being able to, and I've always, applied that to Christ saying, in my Father's house are many mansions. I go before you. So he goes ahead of us, and that where I am, I will lead you unto myself, that where I am, you may be also. I've always
Right.
felt that that was like a story about change. Like I am here, Christ is there. I want him to pull me forward. Does that sound like
Yes, yes, that's actually the definition of the term agape. Because as we interact with each other, we call out personhood from each other. We're constantly looking for what's real, what we can identify with. Are you in there? You see, we're looking for each other in each other. We're not satisfied with I'm not going to judge you by the way you dress or by the words your accent or your color of your skin or any of that. I want to know who you are. I want to know what spirit you're of. You see, what is your spirit? And then I want to know the history of how that spirit has been manifesting in the world, because that is your character. You see, and that's based on memory. So, and I mean a structural kind of memory, a systemic memory, not just a conscious memory.
mm-hmm,
You see, what ingrained memory.
mm-hmm.
So, so those, see, and when we talk in terms like this, then the soul becomes much more real. The idea of soul becomes much more real, but it's way more nuanced than a lot of people think, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk about self or the I am, we have to regard ourselves as a point of awareness.
And it's
When
great that you brought that up because I did have a question about the I am. So yeah.
Yeah. So if we go all the way down into the core of our being, that's what we are. It's like we're an open eye. We're a
Yeah,
point of awareness.
I was just in a math class and they described a point on a graph as a space with no area, which I thought
That's
was
right.
an interesting definition because I feel like that's exactly what awareness is. It's a space with no area. It just is a point of observation and
It's absent of all dimension. It's zero dimension. And that is really the gateway. That's the straight gate that Christ talked about. Because when he told us to go within, he said the kingdom of heaven is within. As we go within, we approach that straight gate, which is the zero dimension part of ourselves. When we think of it, we've got these three axes going on all the time, the XYZ axes,
mm-hmm,
the up and down, the side to side, the front and back, which is like up and down is in psychological terms, the up and down is values. This is good, this is bad. The right and left is like a field of action. It's our choices, this or that, yes or no. And then the forward and back, that's our orientation, what we're moving toward or what we're moving away from, what's gone on in the past and what we anticipate in the future. So we have those three axes. If you think of it in those terms, and then you, instead of going out on those axes, you travel inward to the center where they all intersect, and you do that carefully and with great intention, then you actually will collapse all of those dimensions into a 0 point, and from that 0 point you actually pop through into a higher world.
Can the same be said, like, if you think, like, I'm a math person, so if you take, 1 to 2, 0.5 is in between, and and it's like, you have, the past, the future, and the now. But if you
Hmm.
zoom in, it the picture doesn't really change, and the now is just as elusive as it was before you even moved. But I do feel like, with Rudolf Steiner's descriptions about initiation, I feel there comes a point where, like you said, it just pops, and
Yeah,
you realize that this peeling forward to try to get to this point is like the narrow gate that Christ spoke of, and
yep,
it just pops, and
yep,
for me, I felt like it happened when I had like dualistic thinking, like, I am of God or I am not of God, and you feel like you're caught between these things, but when they become balanced, you're both neither of them and both of them at the same time, I felt
that's
like.
correct.
But
That's the
when
correct.
that
Yep.
happens, it kind of disintegrates into nothing, and you're basically just free to live the rest of your life.
Yeah, well, there's a functional aspect to that. It's like we're dealing with paradox, right? So I am of God and I'm not of God. So that means I am totally one with God and I'm totally autonomous
Yeah.
and free will, that kind of dichotomy. So if you hold those two truths simultaneously and not try to make them into the same thing, but hold them as two separate things and both being true, even though they tend to negate each other, then out of that, the tension of those two things, a third thing will arise. You see, that's
Yeah.
the key, because we're dealing with a consciousness that's built for this plane of manifestation. Our consciousness is set up so that we can survive here. So what the way we use it here does not necessarily apply how we should use it on these other planes, because in one sense you could just call it levels of abstraction, right? In order to think abstractly, we have to be able to hold two opposites simultaneously and see what is born of them. You
Yeah.
see, just by virtue of them existing together, because the brain is set up to choose. A is not B, right? The Aristotelian. So, but this is different. This is, and that kind of discrimination and discernment is absolutely necessary in the field of action where we are here,
And I
and it
feel
gives
like
us
there's a very like sexual component to it all too, because I feel
absolutely, yep,
like we came from this world, so it's only natural that the forces of this world are inside us as well. And I think that's totally true. Like if the sun is male, the light is like penetrative, it
hmm
penetrates what it goes into. And the moon, which is more like feminine, does not create light of itself, but only reflects the light of the male. And
yes,
the
that's
sun
right,
and the moon are in this like interesting sexual dance that produces like infinite amounts of pleasure all the time, just in the
right,
universe, I feel like.
right, right. Well, another a really good example of that is a seed and soil. So seed is like a little packet of information. You put it in the soil is the intelligence.
Yeah,
You
like
know,
the
the
female aspect, what can I do with this information?
She
How
will
can
take
I?
whatever you give her and multiply it and extrapolate it beyond your wildest dreams.
Mhm.
You see? So the male aspect is the idea, just that kind of like an algorithm or a command, and you put that into the soil, and then the soil knows exactly what to do with it. And one seed can cover the planet in trees, right?
Yeah.
Without any, all restraints removed, one seed could cover the planet with trees.
And that's kind of similar to what Christ said about the mustard seeds becoming,
Yeah,
massive trees and such.
right, right. So, we could work in, fractal geometry into that. We could talk about cause and effect. We can talk about all kinds of ways that one principle plays itself out.
Mhm.
So if that's a universal reality, then we have to take that, we have to look within and see, well, how does that work in us?
Yeah.
What are the seeds that we plant, and what do we plant them into? Our seeds are our thoughts, and they get planted into the subconscious.
Mhm. Yeah,
And
like
then the
when I see
subconscious works them
trees,
out.
when I see trees, I feel like I see like a thought process, like starting off with one idea and then goes this way and then this way and then this, I feel like
Right.
there are representations out in the world of things that are inside of us and vice versa.
Yeah. The fundamental premise, and this is really important when it comes to understanding soul, is connectivity. Everything is connected. Everything in this world, and both above this world and below this world, are connected. Now there are layers, there are liminal spaces in between, those domains, but they are all connected. Just like all the keys of a piano keyboard, they're all connected, right? Even though some are dissonant to others, they all work together as one. You can't just remove one and have a coherent instrument anymore.
Hmm.
So we base our understanding on a fundamental premise of connectivity, and that is how we communicate with each other. If we weren't connected, we would not be able to even see each other, much less understand. You see, we have to have and the connectivity is not just because our bodies and brains are similar. There is in a way that we can't see, just like we can't see electricity, there is a real body within which all bodies live. And from one perspective, we could say all bodies are one body. You see, like there's only one human body, and the first refraction that goes through is into the sexes, so that bodies are either male or female with their particular things, and then those domains have their subsets of intelligence in terms of operation and how they connect with each other.
Hmm.
You see,
Yeah.
so these things they're
And
absolutely
that
essential in
springs
order to
to, I mean,
understand the soul.
it hasn't been proven that if you take, two electrons that were on one atom, put them on opposite sides of the earth and you rotate one, the other one still rotates even though it's miles and miles away. Have you ever heard that one before?
Yeah, that's action at a distance, or
Yeah, that's
entrainment.
pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's all. That's looking at it from a scientific materialistic uh, mindset, and they're finding, yeah, it's real. It happens. They don't know why. They don't know how. I like what David Bohm had to say. You know him? He was a physicist.
I
Okay,
think you've
David
mentioned
Bohm.
him before, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, he was brilliant. He was Einstein called him, what did he call him? He regarded him like a son, and the Dalai Lama regarded him as his science advisor. And I mean, Bohm, he was at the top of his field,
How do you spell
and
that?
Bohm.
Physicist?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, he gave the analogy of like a fish tank with one fish in it being observed by two teams of scientists. The one team had their camera looking at the side of the fish tank, seeing the fish in one aspect. The other team had their camera at 90 degrees to that one, seeing the fish in another aspect. And the two teams are communicating with each other, thinking that they're looking at their own fish, like they're two fish, right? And they're saying, oh my God, when my fish moves, your fish moves. You see?
Yeah, yeah.
You think about that and you begin to see how maybe what we call reality is completely inverted, right?
Yeah,
What
one
we
thing I
think of
think
as
of,
real is completely not.
the first time I read the Kabbalion, the first thought that popped in my mind that I felt was like really awe-inspiring was the above and below one. You know, the below is like the above, and what vice versa. And
Yeah.
the first thought I had was zooming into atoms, you see bodies orbiting other bodies, and then you zoom
Hmm.
out and you go into the macrocosm, you see bodies orbiting other bodies. Do you
Right.
think that this is just like one big loop? I mean, I think of like God's phrase, you know, I am the Alpha and the Omega. And if you think of like a ring, the Alpha and the Omega are in the same exact spot, you know. And I thought this was like a spiritual vision of that same principle, that, you know, the universe, you know, when you go up to the macrocosm and you end up back at the bottom. So it's kind of like the Alpha
Right.
is the Omega,
Right.
same spot, you
But
know.
but even there, you know, it's a matter of perspective, because if you look at the universe that way, from the macro to the micro, you're looking at it essentially from the outside in. One of the main evolutionary steps, that advancements that we made as a human race, was abstract thinking. So we learned how to think in terms of principles. So when you say that, you know, like galaxies and atoms have thing in common, in that is a body is orbiting around another body, what is that in terms of principle? You say you're a math guy, that's all math is, right? It's thinking in terms of rules and principles, sets, and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So what, you know, when you see that, then you realize that you have a you have this concept of spinning, right? Everything spins, and it begins to show up, like whenever something moves, it automatically starts to spin. And as it spins, it sets up a field that is at right angles to its direction of movement.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like the right hand rule. You grab a wire, and the thumb points the direction of the current, the fingers show you which direction the magnetic field is going. You see,
Yeah.
so what we're dealing with is a fundamental principle that applies in all domains. Even in the social domain, you will have a person who steps forth as a leader, and everybody starts to rotate around him. You see, and wherever he goes, he generates a field of activity. You see, so it's in different domains, different in different perspectives, different
Yeah. That makes me
parameters, right?
think of Steiner's quote that, you know, there is no one particular truth, but a harmony and agreement between all truths. I mean, I feel like, you know, there are principles that kind of are, trying to think of the word I'm looking for. I'm losing my train of thought, but they're ever pervasive principles, and you know, I feel like,
Yeah,
you know, if you think of like pantheism, something can be deduced of God from the study of this
yeah.
principle.
Well, pantheism is just that's just a study of the different aspects of the one deity,
Mm-hmm.
right? See, it's all the Greek gods and Roman gods, any system where you have a multitude of gods. What That's just a pre-scientific periodic table of the elements.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a description of how different aspects work together. Like you have the god of Mars and you have the god of Venus, right? And so those are describing different psychological states. How do those two interact with each other? That's spelled out in everything that those two gods, the stories that they engage in, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's an analysis of forces, psychological and spiritual forces within us, that these external gods and their stories are describing, because we tell stories. That's how we understand life and everything. We do it through telling stories. So in the pre-scientific era, that's how they explained how things work, was through stories of personified forces and energies and aspects. That's all astrology is.
Mm-hmm.
See, and it all ties together. The stars, you know, the constellations really have very little to do with astrology. That's not what it's about. They're just convenient reference points, the actual stars. But there's a geometric pattern that's absolutely intangible, and yet exerts a structure upon everything, all of life, related to the earth and how the earth is situated.
Mm-hmm.
You see, so
Yeah.
this is a whole different. It's a different level of thinking, and it's so frustrating to try to engage in conversation with the average person who hasn't thought of these things. They tend to move to a very childlike understanding of things and stories, and they don't have the capacity to think in terms of abstract thought. They can't think in terms of first principles. And what you said a little earlier, yeah, they're just a few principles, like the Kabbalion lists 7, right?
Hmm.
But those are very distinct, very well thought out uh, uh, principles that can be translated into other languages, such as the language of science, physics, chemistry. It's all there.
Hmm.
They're the same principles. They're just spoken in different vocabularies.
Hmm. Well, listen, Michael, I don't want to keep you too long. Can I just ask you one more question? So
Sure.
we know the story of Midas and the Midas touch. Do you think that the soul, and like alchemy too, my interpretation of it is that alchemy is kind of like a metaphor for inward processes in order to obtain gold? And I don't think any of us would say, all right, we're looking to make gold coins from what we're doing in our inner work. But I think with the story of the Midas touch, do you think that a soul could be trained and worked on by itself to perceive in the world gold and value and appreciation for everything, just like the Midas touch? So you could say that's gold.
Well, yeah, I think the Midas touch was, it was a parable or a fable that, warned against greed, because didn't he touch his loved ones like his daughter and turned her to gold?
Yes.
So it's like, there's a cautionary tale involved in that, and that means don't get fixated in one particular
Yeah. What I'm referring to,
intention.
and what I base this off of, is Steiner's, like in his book, how to higher worlds and how to approach them. He
Hmm.
mentions the beginning steps of esoteric training as to be in a constant state of awe. And I think if you practice that, this kind of like Midas touch, observation, I think comes out of that as a product if you
Yeah,
practice.
yeah. You could look at it that way, because gold is, there are a lot of reasons why it's valued, but it can stand in just for value itself, value per se, right? So so in awe is seeing value in everything. It's being overwhelmed by the intrinsic nowness and aliveness of all things, the
I think
interconnection of
that
life.
applies well to human beings too. I mean, some of
Oh
us
yeah,
would say, "Oh, that person is not worth the time." I don't know, and just stuff like that. So I think this Midas touch can be applied to people as well, seeing Christ in people, seeing the value in people, regardless of what they're capable of or what they do or what kind of car they
right,
drive.
right. Well, there is a fundamental understanding that all people have intrinsic value, and that as a race and as people who have a sense of our own inner selves, we know that we have an inner reality. And the more you do, then the more you recognize that in other people. And therefore all human life therefore becomes sacred.
Mm-hmm.
So we might look at another person and say, well, that person is say hasn't taken advantage of every opportunity they had, or yeah, every person has a field of action in which their existence is an absolute necessity to the whole. In other words, there is like all of existence is one interconnected web of life, like
Kind of like
Chief
in
Seattle said.
taking certain animals out of an ecosystem would affect the ecosystem.
Exactly. So if you cut one of those threads in the web of life, the whole web is affected. But the web is set up so that, individual who are born and we die, but it's all according to a cycle and compensation. There's compensatory forces at work there. But if we get in and we disrupt that process, or we try to cut out a whole section of the web, the whole web could collapse.
Mm-hmm. I'd just like to ask you one more question. I always love the song "Oh Holy Night," and in that song, I love the phrase "the soul felt its worth." So maybe to conclude, could you talk about that? How the soul feels its own worth.
Well, we all have a direct connection to God, and that interface, our interface with God, is our soul. It's like a thread that goes from us to God, and that's where we are known. You put it that way. Even if we can't see God, God sees us. In other words, we are known.
Yeah, and I also tied that to Rumi's quote. I don't know if it was attributed to him, but that which you seek is also seeking you, which has biblical and scriptural reference. The woman searching for the coin, Jesus searching for the shepherd searching for the lambs, and so to be known by God is a very well established concept, right?
Yeah, and when we go within, then. And we get a sense of an inner aliveness. There's something in us that's alive. And the first realization is that it's us. We're becoming aware of our own self. But then behind that, there's a greater aliveness. And that aliveness loves us, loves that presence that we are. That greater presence wants to unite with the lesser presence and become one with it. That's coming from within. That's the meaning of we love because God first loved us. Mm-hmm. We're responding to a primal love.
That's great. All right, awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Michael. I really appreciate you taking the time to meet with me today. Again, I'm just going to splice this up into a podcast, and submit it for a class. It's not going to be posted anywhere other than this class's board, which will get deleted soon. So let you know what this is used for. I appreciate your time and your help. And I wanted to ask you, you're still doing those meetings, but you have to sign up for your email on your website now. Is that what it is?
Yes. If you sign, I know you were signed up for a while.
I thought you changed something, because I used to just get email links to Zoom classes and then I would just click and join. But I thought you said you changed your system where you have to be signed up on your website to.
Yeah. I'm still working out the ins and outs of the sophisticated email system. But if you want to be notified of all of that, just go on and subscribe to Spirit Briefings. It says get Spirit Briefings for free. That puts you into my system, and then I'll put you in class announcements.
Oh, great.
That's one group, and then you'll get all of those announcements as well.
Sorry, hold on. Where do I go to? You said what was it? Listings or something?
MacielMaciel.com.
Okay, hold on one second. MacielMaciel.com, and you click what?
Scroll down a little bit and you'll see get Spirit Briefings for free. That's my daily email inspiration.
Great. Awesome. So I'll make sure to fill that out and see if I can join some of your classes near future.
Oh yeah, I'd love to have you. I'm teaching 2 classes a week now. One on Wednesdays at 8 o'clock Eastern time, and one on Saturday morning at 10 o'clock Eastern time.
Oh, that actually would be really convenient, the Saturday one, because that's.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
good.
That's great. I was thinking you only had ones during the week, so that's good.
Yeah, and you can catch up too with or peruse around my YouTube site. My YouTube channel is always there.
Great, awesome. Well, thanks again, Michael. I really appreciate you taking the time.
You bet, Mike. It's nice to see you again.
Good to see you again too. I'm going to stop.